Salut les amis et bienvenue dans... we're doing this podcast in English?
Yes.
Hello and welcome to the Transplant Kitchen on Paris Underground Radio. We're your hosts, Omid Tavalai and...
Alannah McPherson Tavalai.
Otherwise known as Emperor Norton, purveyors of food from California, the American West, and the Pacific Rim, right here in Paris, France.
So today we're going to talk about cookies.
Like the kind you have to accept every time you load up a webpage?
Oh, no.
You know, you'd think that cookies are there to know what you've done, so once you accept them, you shouldn't have to accept them again.
They only named them cookies to make them sound appealing.
Well, if we're going to be complaining about cookies, I am going to start right off the bat and complain about cookies here in France.
Ugh.
Your reaction.
Sorry.
I know. So, I'm not making an indictment against all cookies in France. There are some good cookies here.
Oh, yeah.
But when you go to the store, like, even at the supermarket now, they have display cases, but you go by these bakeries, these places that specialize in cookies and cookies alone, and they're all pale and flat.
They're not cookies. I don't know what those are, but they're not cookies.
I don't know, maybe they're just underbaked or something else going on.
Oh, there's a million things wrong with those cookies.
They're not crunchy. There's none of that caramelized goodness that we expect from cookies. Maybe it's because, now I've noticed this when I've worked with some places or gone to a quote-unquote American place. They offer a cookie as a dessert. Now, coming where we come from, cookie isn't really a dessert. It's like kind of your snack. But because they don't have like the snacking culture here, maybe because it's a sweet thing, it's a dessert, and everybody eats every dessert with a spoon, so it needs to be soft and spoonable to be able to pick it up.
No.
No? That's my theory.
Because kids have cookies with their goûter, and goûter is a solidly institutionalized time where you have a snack, and it is almost always sweet.
Okay. But they would call it like a biscuit or...
I don't know.
Anyway, but when they say cookie, which, you know, it's an anglicism that has been picked up here.
Yeah.
It's almost always garbage. Sorry, I don't mean to cast aspersions on an entire country, the place where we live and love, but the cookies fucking suck. And there are some other ones where there seems to be like this base cookie recipe, and then they plop toppings onto them, like some kind of little canapé, which is fine, but it's like putting anything on a bun and calling it a burger. Another problem here.
Don't get started.
And like a burger or a sandwich or any other composed food, a good cookie should be greater than the sum of its parts. Do you agree?
Yes.
Yeah. So you want some crunch, some chew, some tenderness, not just a round of shortbread and a wedge of candied orange on top. You know who you are. You know what you're doing. It's not that good. All right, I'm being kind of a dick, but because I'm not that big a sweets guy, but I love cookies so much. And I love your cookies, and you do a great job with them. And we've sold a gazillion of them. Almost literally, if a gazillion is a number. But we weren't always that successful with them. At least not me. I remember when we first moved here. So it was shortly before the elections where Barack Obama got elected as president of the United States. And during that whole campaign, this thing came out with like the Michelle Obama cookie recipe. And I tried to make it. And it was shit. And French friends were like, oh, I tried your first lady's recipe. It's shit. And so maybe it's just a universal thing that when you try to bake cookies here in France, they're shit. I tried the Laura Bush cowboy cookies, since there's this whole, like, first lady cookie thing, and they're nothing like your cowboy cookies, Alannah. Not at all anything to do with them.
Yeah.
You've been making those since you were, like, what?
17.
And now they're, like, our number 1 or number 2 selling product?
Yeah.
Those came out all wrong. I tried Thomas Keller from the French Laundry. He has a chocolate chip cookie recipe that's, like, pretty simple. I tried that, and they were garbage. And even I did Dory Greenspan. She has those world peace cookies that are like kind of famous recipe. They're really good. But when I made those, they were still kind of crap. And I'm not blaming the recipes here at all because obviously lots of other people made them. Lots of other people loved them. I've had them when other people have made them in the US and I thought they were good. But when it came to me doing them here, they were shit. Mostly, they spread out too thin, they seemed greasy, and I'm looking at you, you're nodding your head. I'm gonna kind of guess that you want to get into the butter, because I think the butter might be the culprit. Our awesome, superior, grass-fed, churned by hand butter was fucking up my cookies.
Well, so first off, let's just say that it's not just you. Also, the thing with cookies is while cookies are amazing to eat and seem so simple, it's an activity you do with children, right? You bake cookies.
I think we did that at our daughter's school once.
Oh, God, yes, we did.
That was fun. Anyway.
Cooking cookies with 33-year-olds was super fun. Her teacher does not get paid enough. So cookies, while everyone says they're an activity you do with children, cookies are actually very fickle. I don't know why people always make this big deal about how cakes are so challenging, because with cookies, every single step of the way, something can go wrong.
Yeah, I have noticed that, and that's why I let you do all our cookies. So we're going to do something a little different, I think, this time than all 2 episodes we've already done, where we're just going to kind of go through some basic parts of a cookie and what can go wrong with them and why. And we're going to attribute this, we're going to focus on what's different amongst these ingredients in North America, where all our cookie recipes originally came from, and here in France, and maybe Europe in general. Yes. So if you are somebody who lives somewhere between the two, this will be useful to you. If you're not, well, it could still be useful to you, because Alannah is full of interesting facts, both scientific and otherwise. So let's get back to the butter. What's wrong with the butter?
Well, there's nothing wrong with the butter, but European butter and European style butter and American style butter are 2 different beasts. First off, European style butter has a higher fat content and a lower moisture content, which is probably why your cookies were spreading out into one giant cookie. You had too much fat in your recipe.
So it doesn't just make my cookies taste richer, it screws them up?
Well, no. So European butter actually does have better flavor, or actually a flavor, because it is fermented, or nowadays they add cultures, so it adds a bit of a
tang.
Yes,
a funk.
Yeah, a bit of a tang, which actually is great in sweet goods because it adds some balance. Mm-hmm. American butter is not, so it just has a neutral taste.
Okay.
Which is why when people talk about European butter, they talk about the flavor. It's actually part
because
of it.
It actually has flavor.
Yes.
Okay.
But the problem with too much fat is then the dough itself becomes unstable. The flour is not able to hold up against all the fat, and once it hits the heat, it just melts.
Okay. Speaking of melting, do you melt your butter first when you're making cookies, or do you beat or cream the butter?
It really depends on the recipe. It depends on the ingredients involved and the texture you're looking for. When you use melted butter to make cookies, you end up with a chewier cookie. When you beat the butter, you cream the butter, they also say, you're going to end up with a lighter, softer cookie, but sometimes also a cakey cookie, because it aerates it.
Okay. And I know my own answer to this, because I don't allow, in any kitchen where I work, I don't allow salted butter, because I think that's for putting on bread or radishes, if you want to be really français. Salted versus unsalted butter, where are we with that?
I really recommend I personally always use unsalted butter, because then you can add the salt amount that you need to your cookie dough.
Okay. Because that seems to be like the thing lately with a lot of the viral recipes lately that I've seen like some so-called chefs putting out there and they become famous. They're like, oh, use salted butter because the salt's already in there. Well, maybe that works in the States because you have this like industrial, like, uniform product. But if you tried to use like some salted Brittany butter here.
Oh, God. Crunchy cookies.
Yeah. Well, in the wrong way.
Yeah. Well, the problem with it is that if you're using a recipe, everyone is using different products that they're buying. So unless you're specifically saying only use exactly this type of butter, then you're not going to have a consistent salt amount. So it's just better to add the salt separately.
All right. So what is the solution? Let's say we're here and I'm trying to do Michelle Obama's world famous cookies. What do I need to tweak there then in terms of butter to make it work as somebody in Europe who wants a little bit of the good America?
Okay. If you're using an American recipe, but you're using European style butter, you would want to reduce the butter amount by about 15%.
Okay. So if we're going by grams, if the recipe originally called for 200 grams of butter, then I want 170 grams of butter. If we're using cups, who knows? Because I don't know how to.
Don't use
weigh
volume.
And use grams. Okay. And so the next big ingredient I would say is flour, because every cookie is going to have some kind of flour in it, unless you're making some weirdo dietetic. Oh. Well, there's some good stuff like rice flour. But okay, anyway, flour. I know for sure, because we talked about this in the first episode, that our flours are different.
Yes.
Between North America and Europe, but we didn't get that far into what are we looking at here?
Well, so the majority of the flour that you buy in the supermarket in North America is made from hard red wheat. In Europe, it's actually a soft wheat. Now, what that means is that the North American flour, just your regular flour, all-purpose flour you buy in the supermarket, has a higher protein, more gluten than what we would buy as a standard flour here in Europe.
Okay. Because another thing, when I first got here, a lot of people are like, oh, T55, that's in French, type 55. It's basically a measure of the grind of the flour, like a fairly fine flour that's equivalent in grind to US all-purpose. Everybody's like, oh, use T55, that's the equivalent of all-purpose. Is that really the case?
I don't find that to be the case for baking. I have had more success using the T65.
Mm-hmm. Which is, it's a slightly coarser grind, but it's not a coarse flour. It's not like whole wheat flour.
No, it's not a whole wheat flour.
What I've found is that the T65 is just more flavorful. Is that does that have any bearing on the kind of wheat? Do they use something different? Because the only other thing I've noticed is that the T65 is almost always organic. I think I've seen conventional T65 once, and it was from Portugal. Is my mind just playing tricks on me and I just think that the organic product tastes better in cookies and everything else?
I don't know. Sorry.
Hey, I appreciate the honesty.
No, I mean, so I looked it up and it's T65 and T55 are made from the exact same wheat. It's just a different processing, similar to the processing of when you buy pastry flour in the US versus all-purpose flour.
Okay. So pastry flour is T45 here?
As they use it here, yes.
Okay. One thing to note is we use T65 as all-purpose in pretty much most of our recipes. It does cost 3 times more than the T55 flour, which is probably why a lot of people use T55. But if you're not doing huge volumes, if you're not worried about margins and cost and whatever, like a big bakery might be, totally worth it to go get the organic T65. I think your baked goods, at least your American baked goods, or, what the kind of stuff that we make, would just taste that much better.
I just find the texture is closer to what I'm used to if I'm comparing it to what I would make in the U.S. And one note is, when you're saying organic flour, is it makes people think they have to run off to one of the organic
don't do that.
Stores.
Don't do that.
They just have, you just go to the supermarket and get the store brand T65.
Yeah. And then it's only three times more, because if you go to the Naturalia or whatever organic store you have near you, you're going to pay about 5 to 6 times more than conventional flour. And it's the same thing. They probably all come from the same mills, but I'm not going to say that's the case, but I'm assuming the generic stuff, like anywhere else in the world, comes from the same people who make the name brand stuff. Did you know by French law we actually have to say when we're taking a commercial break?
Yes.
Take it away, Alannah.
I don't know what you want me to
You
say.
say we'll be right back.
We'll be right back.
With more Transplant Kitchen. And we're back from commercials, because we're supposed to say that. All right. Other big one. Sugar.
Oh, sugar. So, sugar is complicated here.
Yeah.
Well, being from the U.S., I went to the supermarket when we first arrived, and I just wanted to buy some sugar. And my French was minimal. So I go and I'm thinking, I looked it up. Sucre. Okay, I'm going to buy that. And you go, and it's like sucre en poudre, sucre cristal, cassonade, all these, and what to pick.
Yeah. Vergeoise.
Oh, God, yeah.
Sucre blanc, blah, blah, blah. There's like 400 different varieties of sugar, which is, they're all valid. They're all...
Well, and we have variations like that in the U.S., but generally the labeling for the sugar, the white granulated sugar that you would buy and use in the U.S., it just says sugar on it.
So in the U.S., you'd be buying like granulated sugar.
Right.
The only distinction I ever saw, like, growing up would be like, cane sugar. My mom insisted on buying the CNH cane sugar.
Yes. So we'll get to that in a minute. But they do have, in the U.S., you can buy superfine sugar as well as other types of sugar in the raw and things like that.
Splenda.
That's not sugar. So, getting back to types of sugar. In the United States, most of the sugar you buy is cane sugar made from sugar cane, whereas in Europe, most of the sugar you buy is made from beets, sugar beets, not purple beets.
And does that make a difference in the flavor or texture or general results of what you're baking?
Interestingly, chemically, they are almost identical. It's something like a 0.05% difference.
Okay.
So, for most things, you won't notice a difference.
I mean, I do notice it in the difference between, like, Mexican Coke and European Coke.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. I can definitely... Mexican Coke has a slightly different flavor, and I'm assuming that's the cane sugar versus the beet sugar.
Well, one thing to consider, because there are a lot of people who insist on only using cane sugar, especially for baking, and this might be with Coke, depending on what their recipe is that the process for making brown sugar from pure cane sugar versus beet sugar is different. For cane sugar, brown sugar is just part of the natural process of refining the sugar. Molasses occurs in that process, and molasses is what makes the brown part of brown sugar. Whereas for beet sugar, they actually have to add molasses back in after the sugar has been completely refined to white.
So, when you buy, like, the cassonade sugar here...
Well, so cassonade is different. It is less refined sugar.
So it's like that sugar in the raw that we had in the States or whatever.
Exactly.
And then, can you find brown sugar, as we'd call it in the States? Can you find that here? Is there an equivalent? Because when I got here, some soi-disant pastry chef, who will go unnamed, insisted that cassonade is the same as brown sugar, and I put that in a couple of different recipes, and I was pissed off.
Yes. You can.
Yeah.
Generally, I find it at, the natural supermarkets, the organic bio places. They import it from Belgium.
Oh, the Hygiena brand from Belgium?
Yes.
Yeah. Which I'm sure it's not produced in Belgium because I don't see fields of sugarcane there.
But it actually is made from sugarcane instead of from sugar beets.
Okay.
And there's a lot of discussion about why is it, since they're so chemically similar, the two sugars, the beet versus the cane. And some people say it comes down to the moisture
Mm-hmm.
Because when you think of brown sugar, like as Americans, we think of this like soft product.
Right, yeah.
That's kind
as
of...
opposed to like dry and...
Right. If you
griddly.
shake the container that it's in and it sounds like you're shaking sand, that is not the sugar that you want.
This is not the sugar we're looking for.
Right.
So can you make brown sugar if you have like a bag or box of beet sugar and a bottle of molasses?
Sort of. So you could take white refined sugar and add molasses to it, combine it together, and you'll end up with a brown sugar that is okay. The one issue, however, is that the molasses here is also not what you find in the US.
Yeah, I've found that you only have like that black strap,
right.
and it's like thicker. It's like you spoon it out of a jar,
it's
like
not
even
even
when it's warm out.
It's not even that it's thicker, it's that the molasses that you often find in the US is unsulfured.
Okay.
Meaning it has a milder flavor. Here in France, they don't sell molasses generally at the regular supermarkets. You have to go to like the bio store, and the molasses is kind of a health product, so it is the, as we call it, blackstrap molasses, which has sulfur.
So does it smell like rotten eggs?
No, it has a much stronger flavor. The one bonus to it is it actually is high in iron.
Yeah.
So
I've found that it tastes kind of licoricey.
Yes,
almost.
it has kind of a strong licorice.
Some people
flavor.
don't like, but I like licorice.
Yeah.
So
you could use the molasses available here and mix it in. To get dark brown sugar, you would need about 6.5% molasses to sugar. And
by weight. Yeah. Grams, not
weight.
Not
no volume. No volume ever.
Okay.
And for light brown, 3.5%.
Okay. So 3.5% of the total weight.
But you'd have to play with it a bit since you're working with the blackstrap molasses.
All right. So, shopping list: butter, flour, sugar, eggs. What's up with the eggs here?
The eggs are great here.
Yeah.
You don't put them in the refrigerator.
Why is that?
Because they don't wash them.
So you just keep dirty eggs out on the counter and they're better.
Yes. Well,
okay, I'm being facetious. It is actually true. People are like, oh my god, Europeans don't refrigerate their eggs. And they're unwashed, so they have like shit and feathers on them. Dude, it's like getting fresh eggs at the farm. Except you get them at the supermarket. There is like a hierarchy of like the quality of the eggs, or the cage-free, organic, battery, like battery cage chickens. Like they actually say poule en batterie on some of them, so you are getting like industrial farm cage chickens. But they still are unwashed, and they keep for weeks on the kitchen counter unless it's really hot.
Right.
In the States, they wash the eggs, and what does that do?
It removes the protective coating off the shell, which then makes them susceptible to spoilage without refrigeration.
Gotcha. Anyway, I don't think that has anything to do with the cookies, but it was for us, it was a culture shock for coming here. And then
it actually
not
is,
for you. You grew up on a farm.
Yeah. It actually is a good thing, though, because you're starting with a room temperature egg. Instead of having to get an egg out of the fridge and then leave it out and being all stressed about you doing bad things to your egg while you wait for it to warm up.
Which is funny because working with bars, they often keep their eggs in the fridge, even here, because you want the egg white to make like a whiskey sour or a flip or something like that.
Right.
So, with that tangent done, otherwise, difference between North American or specifically U.S. eggs and French eggs.
So, the one thing that threw me off when I arrived here is that I was looking at a recipe, an American recipe, and it said to use large eggs. And they were very clear about that. They were very insistent. And so I went to the store and I bought large French eggs. And I had a whole sheet of one single cookie instead of individual cookies.
And it makes that much of a difference, like the caliber of the egg?
Well, the thing is that U.S. large eggs are roughly the same weight as French medium eggs. So I ended up using too much egg because I used French large eggs.
Okay. And French medium eggs, moyen. They're 50 grams without the shell, roughly, more or less. Roughly. There is like a range where they're supposed to be like 45 to 60 or something.
It's like 53 to 63 grams is the allowable weight for the egg.
With the shell, I think. Because they can't weigh them without.
Right.
But I think
it's
you
a
get
range
roughly
of 10 grams.
50 grams out of a moyen medium egg here, which is the same as a large egg in the States.
Equivalent of what they call a
Although
large egg.
here we have large and they're really big.
Right.
But that would be the equivalent of like the jumbo or XXL in the US or something like that. Like, they really, besides the US needing to go metric, all this other shit needs to be standardized by the ISO, the UN, the WHO, whoever the fuck it is. Really just needs to get on the ball. Because if we're going to be globalized and,
No, but that's the magic.
We'd be out of a job then, wouldn't we?
That's the magic of travel and living different places.
Okay. I'll concede that.
Yes.
But it sucks for when you're like traveling and want to make something. Okay, shopping list is done. We know our little pitfalls of the ingredients themselves. What are other ways you can fuck up a cookie?
Oh, the list is endless. Well, I guess we could start with what temperature you bake your cookies.
Okay. I mean, to me, almost any baking, with certain exceptions, it's 180 degrees Celsius, 350 degrees Fahrenheit. That's my rule of thumb.
It's a pretty good
but
standard.
Okay. But I've seen people go like, oh, no, the cookies should bake at 170 or even as low as 160. To me, that sounds like low and slow. Like you're almost at barbecue or slow cooker levels there. Like,
well, the problem with having your oven too low is your cookies are going to spread and they're not going to brown enough.
That seems to be what I see in the display cases here a lot of the time. Is there a problem if you have the oven too hot? Not that anybody here has ever done that.
Yes, there is a problem. First off, the cookies will become too dark or possibly even burn on the outside before the inside is cooked. The other thing is you can end up with cookies that are much more of a ball domed shape because they bake, the outside bakes up before they get a chance to spread properly.
Okay. So dial in that temperature. Don't just willy-nilly hot oven, medium oven like it was 60 years ago. What did they do then? And the oven temperature is important. And I know for sure, but you can elaborate on this, that the dough temperature is kind of important.
Yes.
How so?
Well, most cookie doughs, and you have to say most because cookies are all very individual and
they're like people.
It just really depends. Yes.
Diverse.
Yes. But most cookie doughs benefit from being chilled before baking. It helps them hold their shape. It keeps them from spreading too much. Additionally, if you make the dough and chill it overnight, it gives a chance for the flour to hydrate.
Mm-hmm. I think it's autolysis is the technical term for it from bread making. I don't know if it's the same.
I was going to say I'm not a bread
making.
person, but I know that that's a concept.
And if the dough's too warm, then you get the opposite, and they spread too flat and stick together on the sheet.
Yeah.
So which is worse?
Oh,
it's a toss-up.
Well, I will admit to having fixed cookies that spread too much with a spatula.
Yeah, pushing the edges back in and
if you open the oven and your cookies have spread all over the place, you can sometimes salvage your efforts by taking it out, putting it not on a cookie rack to cool, but putting it on a heat-proof surface and working very quickly with a metal spatula, gently pushing all the edges in towards the center to create the shape you want.
But if it's become one sheet of cookie, it's too late.
Then you just cut it up and call it bars.
Bars. Okay. Cakes and bars, like in the Midwest. Yeah, I've had cookies that didn't spread enough and they're inoffensive. They're not great, but they're inoffensive, edible. But when you get like the sheet, it's like, All right. I'm actually going to go into a personal cookie niggle of mine, especially here in France, and it's chocolate chunks versus chips. There are very, very, very few places here where you can get a chocolate chip cookie that's actual little chocolate chips.
Right.
Usually they're the big chunks. And I know chocolate chunk cookies are popular. In fact, it seems like after there was that wave of places doing chocolate chunk cookies here that they sprung back again in the US. It's that whole like globalized Instagram trade. My theory is like some of them got like kind of Instagram famous over here. So people in like New York and California or whatever, like, ooh, I'm going to make cookies like I saw in Paris, the French style cookies. And they use the chocolate chunks. Fine. But the funny thing I find here is like the chocolate chunks here are all wrong. They are oftentimes just chocolate bars that are cut up.
Yes.
Other times it's I think they're called the pistolets.
Yes.
The little rounds that you use for chocolate making. Which have a very low melting point. So what happens is you use those instead of chocolate chips in the cookie, and the chunks melt and they contribute to that awful, awful cookie spread. And there's an uneven distribution of chocolate in the cookie, which like kind of pisses me off. Even though, and I'll get to this point in a moment, I like imperfection in cookies. But really, really what you need is a chocolate chip, small, normal sized chocolate chips, not huge chunks, with specifically a high melting point. So that when they're being baked in that cold dough, in that hot oven, the chocolate chips themselves don't melt into oblivion and contribute to that awful spread. I want consistency. That being said, maybe it's because I'm half Japanese, I want imperfection. I want that wabi-sabi. I want my cookies to seem kind of homemade and have a good balance of like crispiness and chew and tenderness. I want it all in one package. One more ingredient I'm going to pick your brain about because I know nothing about this. I'm not going to pontificate like I just did. Oatmeal. Because I love oatmeal chocolate chip cookies. Or as you call them, your cowboy cookies are a variant of oatmeal chocolate chip. What's up with oatmeal? Because those are definitely different, at least in names and terminology here and in North America, or even in England and Ireland. You've got your rolled oats, instant oats, steel cut, flocons d'avoine gros, flocons d'avoine petit. What should we be using, or does it not make a difference and it's a personal preference?
Well, I would say it's a personal preference. For me personally, when I use oatmeal in cookies and other baked goods, I use what Americans refer to as old-fashioned oats, or here...
Like the big paper cylinder of Quaker oats from the supermarket.
I don't...
Remember those?
No.
No? I think they're Quaker old-fashioned oats.
Oh, okay. No, old-fashioned style. Okay. Versus, so in France, those are the flocons d'avoine gros. Mm-hmm. So they're bigger, kind of denser flakes. Mm-hmm. And I like those because once you add them to the dough and they soak up the moisture from the butter and the egg, you still retain the texture. Whereas if you use kind of regular oats, or as they call them here, flocons d'avoine petit, I find they kind of disappear a bit. And so while you do have some texture, it's not the same toothsomeness that I'm looking for.
And those are still like rolled oats, though,
those
right?
Because they're
like flattened
oats.
As opposed to like steel cut or what's it called, like pinhead or something like that. They're like the little pointy. Mm-hmm. Those probably aren't that good in cookies.
No, you would break a tooth.
They're good for your like muesli or whatever. Or
no, not muesli.
Not even muesli.
Those are good cooked.
Like
you would, yes.
All right. Let's take a little break, and when we come back, we'll get into a little recipe. And we're back. All right, it's recipe time. We are not about to give away one of our huge moneymaker recipes. Sorry. Also, those are made for making... Sorry, not sorry. That's our theme this year. Sorry, not sorry. But also, we can't give them to you because they're made at a scale of like 130 million at a time, and you just can't possibly scale that down for personal use. No. I'm kidding. We're not going to give away a proprietary recipe that half of our income is based on. But I will give you one that I have made professionally. It is a base cookie recipe that is hard to fuck up, but easy to fuck with. And we'll get to that in a little bit. These are chocolate chip cookies. It's a recipe I inherited when I took over as chef at an American restaurant a few years back, and the owner didn't want to spend any money. So it was using margarine instead of butter because it's cheaper. It was using cassonade sugar instead of brown sugar. I had to draw the line in something. I was like, okay, yeah, it's fine. There's a lot of ego involved as a chef when you take over at a restaurant and you inherit recipes. If they're good recipes and they work and people like them, you have to, swallow that pride and go ahead and keep going with it. And then maybe introduce your tweaks once you've established yourself there for a while. This one I had to fix right away. But I had to keep the cost down. I had to make it easy enough for anybody to be able to make when I wasn't there. And it had to be basically foolproof. Not that always happened, but here we go. Basic bitch chocolate chip cookies. Is that an offensive term now? Am I not allowed to say that? Basic ass chocolate chip cookies. Still rolling the eyes. Very basic chocolate chip cookies, which you can use as a blank slate to make your own creations. This makes about 1,200 gram cookies or so. Yes, I'm doing this one all in grams because fuck your volumetric measurements, people. Buy a scale. You cannot bake without a scale. Buy a $5 scale, €5 scale, whatever.
Buy a good scale.
A good scale. Buy a €15 scale, €35 scale.
Get an escali.
Escali. Yeah, we can't get those in Europe, though, even though it's a European name. You have to buy them in the U.S. No, I have to buy them in the U.S. and bring them over here.
Oh, they're so good.
Yeah, the ones here are so garbage. They're really slow. Ugh. Even the professional ones. Like, it takes 3 seconds for it to tell you what... Anyway.
Okay.
So, 185 grams of butter. Melted. If you are in North America, add 15% to that. What's 15% on top of 185? That is about 220 grams, something like that. Anyway, do the math. 185 times 1.15.
I have a point to make.
Yes.
When you're asking for melted butter.
Yeah.
People don't always realize this, but you don't want to melt your butter and then immediately dump it into your cookie ingredients.
Okay.
Because it's too hot.
You might cook the egg in the process. Well, no, you don't add the egg till later. But so you're going to cook your ingredients?
Well, so you're adding something super hot to your leavening agents. So you don't want to do that. You want to let it cool just a bit.
Okay.
It can be like body temperature. It doesn't have to be like re-solidified or... it can be warm to the touch. You can put your finger in it and it still feels a bit warm. That's fine. But if you burn yourself, you need to wait. This
gives me a flashback to that fiddly Thomas Keller chocolate chip recipe cookies. I guess for this reason, it didn't explain why. I hate it when recipes don't have an explanation for why you do something.
Right.
It said to melt half the butter and then take the other half of the butter cold and whisk it in.
Right.
And cool that in. I'm like,
that's a quick and dirty way to get yourself room temperature melted butter without the weight.
Okay. So, 185 grams butter melted. 430 grams of T55 or T65. Like we said, we use T65 for almost everything because I was doing a cheap-ass version of this recipe. T55 worked. It's fine. It'll do the job, but T65 is better. If you're in the U.S., your favorite all-purpose could be the very expensive Bob's Red Mill or what's that one with the King Arthur? Or it could be your $1 supermarket stuff. Doesn't matter. This recipe is that universal. 8 grams of baking soda. 8 grams of baking powder. 6 grams of salt. That's like a teaspoon, just so you know.
I was going to say.
Each of those.
What are those?
220 grams of sugar. That's like a cup of sugar, right? Is that?
It's a little more than a cup of sugar.
It's a little more than a cup.
A cup of sugar is 200
Anyway,
grams.
fuck your cup. 220 grams of sugar. And that's like white sugar. 150 grams of light brown sugar. And yes, if you can't get whatever and you're here in France or elsewhere in Europe where, brown sugars are a little dicey, you can use the cassonade in this case. Again, this recipe is really flexible. You can use the wrong ingredients and it'll still pretty much work. 2 eggs.
How much is that? 100 grams of eggs.
100 grams of cracked, out of the shell eggs.
Eggs.
Yeah. with a lot of cookie recipes that are sensitive, we weigh the eggs, like crack them into a bowl or a container separately and weigh them because of the great variance, even in the same caliber of eggs.
Yeah.
So when I say 2 eggs here, I mean 100 grams of egg. But again, this recipe, it works. 180 grams of chocolate chips. Again, because of where I was using the shitty, cheap pistolets of chocolate that caused the spread and whatever. It was fine. It was absolutely not in the owner's budget for me to order the good Cacao de Barry Chocolat Drops, which is the high melting point chocolate chip that you can get here. You can get from almost any supplier here. So god damn it, French cookie makers, do it and get it. Spend a little more. Sorry. It's just such a point of contention for me. 180 grams chocolate chips, whether you're using the shitty low melting point chocolate, proper chocolate chips, ridiculously expensive Toll House chips you bought at the American import store, or if you chop up a chocolate bar. You can even do that. 180 grams.
One point, though, if you're chopping up a chocolate bar, you probably want to buy a bar of dark chocolate.
Okay.
Because the milk chocolate has an even lower melting
so
point,
then it'll just,
and you're just
become a liquefied... It'll just make it a chocolatey dough, like if you use the milk chocolate bar. Yeah, dark chocolate, yes. Additionally, you are going to need a whisk, a rubber or silicone spatula, a mixing bowl, a baking sheet, and parchment paper. You will melt the butter gently in a saucepan or in the microwave. You don't want it like bubbling or browned. And as Alannah noted, you want to let it kind of cool before you add it to everything else. Mix all the dry ingredients except for the chocolate chips, preferably with a whisk to get it all, like I like to use a whisk to get it all even. Because I don't sift the flour. I'm a lazy bastard. In a large mixing bowl.
And so do you know why you mix the dry ingredients for cookies?
So that they're evenly distributed. Any break up, any...
It also helps prevent flour clumping.
Okay. See, again, instead of the sifter. And then you add the melted butter to the dry ingredients and fold it all in with a spatula. Obviously, at this point, you don't want to use the whisk. The whisk is good for the dry ingredients. You can't whisk butter into a cookie dough.
Right, so you're folding it in?
Well, isn't that what it is when you're, like, scraping the side?
So folding is when you're gently mixing in, like, egg whites or something, and you don't want to break or...
Anyway.
Sorry.
Okay, so I am using a spatula.
Right. A
big rubber spatula or silicone spatula. And mixing the butter. And you can do this with a hand mixer, or if you have a KitchenAid, you can do it in the thing. Again, this recipe is bulletproof, so, you can do it with a mixer. You're probably not going to overbeat it or anything.
Basically, you're just combining the ingredients with the butter
until you have like
completely incorporated.
Yeah, the butter needs to be totally incorporated.
But you don't want to go any further than that.
No, you don't want to go further than that. You don't want to toughen up your tough cookie. Good to have in a bare knuckle boxing match. Not so good in your mouth. And then you want to break up the eggs and work those in next. Any tips on getting the eggs into the dough?
Put them all in at the same time.
All in at the same time.
A lot of times recipes will tell you to add the cookies one at a time. But the problem with that is that can lead to overmixing. And with cookies, you really don't want to overmix them because you will end up with flat cookies.
Huh. Did not know that. I just never overmix because I get too tired. And so once everything is combined and looks consistent, that would mean once everything is incorporated. So you don't see little streaks of egg yolk or strands of egg white or chunks of flour or whatever. Work in the chocolate chips. At this point, do not use a mixer or whatever. When you're putting in the chocolate chips, definitely just do the spatula. Or if you're having a hard time with that, don't do this professionally. Okay, I have. Go ahead and dig in with your hand and get those chips in there. Work them in there so that they're evenly distributed throughout. Because I hate unevenly distributed chocolate in a cookie.
So grumpy.
You'll want to ball up the dough into 100-gram chunks. You may need to chill the dough first to make it easier to work with and to ball up. Because if it's a little bit warm, let's say your butter was a little on the warm side, or it's warm in your kitchen, for many reasons, your dough could be really soft after you just made it. So you want to cover it and chill it for a little while. Not too long, because then it's like hard as a rock. But cover it and chill it for a while. And that will make it easier to ball up, whether you're using your hands, a spoon, or an ice cream scooper to pick it up. All valid ways of making cookie dough balls. Get a dozen balls or so, put them on a tray or spread them along in a few Tupperware, not like smushed together, and chill them in the fridge. I would say for at least an hour. Again, it kind of depends on the state of your dough when it goes in or it comes out, but up to overnight for sure. You'll get a good chill if you do it overnight, but maybe you want cookies like really soon. You can't wait. And you can even keep them for a couple of weeks, I would say. I don't know. What's the expiration date on homemade cookie dough? Probably a couple weeks is safe.
Generally, they recommend a week for home fridges.
Week? Okay. And for professionals, 3 to 5 days. Use your judgment. Just make sure if you are refrigerating long term that they're tightly covered, either with like plastic wrap or whatever lid you have for a container, so they don't soak up the smells of your refrigerator. Because the worst thing is baking a fresh cookie and it smells delicious and you bite into it and there's that hint of Velveeta and hot dog or whatever the fuck else it is you keep in your fridge. You, not us, we would never keep things like that in our fridge. Only the best, organic, local, sustainable. Don't shake your head at me. We have an image to maintain. The Transplant Kitchen will be back after a word from our sponsors. And we're back. So you got your balls. It's baking time. You want your oven preheated, once again, to 180 degrees Celsius, 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Does it make a difference if you're using convection or not? I've found kinda sometimes not. Just kind of depends on the oven. Everyone's a little different.
Yeah, every oven's a little different. I mean, I would just do it at that temperature, and if you have convection, you can bake it for a shorter amount of time usually than if you have a traditional oven.
All right.
For cookies.
Okay. Anyway, evenly space those cookies on a baking sheet with parchment paper. A typical home oven sheet, I think, will hold about 6 of these cookies, but when we say typical home oven, if you're in France, yeah, a typical home oven might hold 6, it might hold 4. If you're in Japan, it could be 2. If you're in the US, a typical home oven baking sheet can hold a whole dozen, depending on, again, there are no standards for this stuff. Use your judgment, make sure they're at least a few inches apart to account for spread. And so they're, so they have heat circulating around them. My baking time on these is 14 minutes. I have done this in both regular oven and convection oven. About 14 minutes is correct.
How do you know that they're done? What signs should people look for to know that these particular cookies
are done?
Mm-hmm.
They should have a light brownness to them. Mm-hmm. They're not very brown because we're only using light brown sugar in there. Mm-hmm. So there should be a light golden brown. They should spread till they're like relatively flat with like a little bit of a hump. Not a camel hump, more of a speed bump. Not too high, but not completely flat. If it's completely flat, fuck it, it's over. Your oven was too cool, or your dough wasn't cold enough.
Or you forgot your leavening.
Oh, that never happens to us. That didn't actually happen this morning, did it?
I don't want to talk about it.
And allow them to cool before handling them. But please, for the love of God, cook them at least long enough. Please. So the same place where I created or adapted this recipe that's unfuckable, of course, people fucked it up. Because the owner wanted to sell as many of them as possible and have them ready to go by service. So he told one of the shifts to bake them for only 9 minutes.
What? So
that they would be out of the oven quicker and over to the counter to serve them. Why? What kind of logic? And so when I see this happening with somebody who has put in literally 1.5 million euros into a restaurant, I'm thinking these rinky-dink places selling cookies that look like shit, they don't know any better than this dude.
Yeah.
So this is a very ranty episode, isn't it? I'm sorry. Not sorry. Fix your shit, man. Again, this recipe is very tweakable. It's super tweakable. Please mess around with it. Because it's otherwise so basic. It's boring. Consider it a blank slate and get creative or test your own cookie hypotheses. Because it's a very economical cookie recipe, you can mess it up and you can try to apply some of Alannah's theories here to it and everything to try to fix it and then move on to that from that to other cookies. Use this as your training ground, your dojo, your sparring partner, whatever. And then, of course, share them with us. We'll give you all the addresses and all that later, blah, blah, blah. As usual, if you are not the cooking type, you just like listening to us talk about cooking, or just tired of baking stuff after a year spent making your own sourdough and banana bread, we'll plug some Parisian cookies that we do really like genuinely like. There are good cookies out there, besides our own. Jean Wine 40 in the 2nd arrondissement makes some beautiful and delicious cookies. Check her out. And the creative, homey cookies at Moco Nuts in the 11th will have you hooked.
Oh,
They're so damn good.
So good.
And I'd say, I don't know what she puts in there. We know what she puts in there. It's like, there's stuff like miso and, oh man, so good. There's umami in those cookies, which we didn't really touch on salt that much on the butter thing. Salt your pastries, people. Anyway. Do you like unsalted pastries?
No.
Garbage, right? Naturally, like I said, you can get our range of cookies at a number of specialty coffee shops all around Paris. Just peep us on our socials.
Why?
To see where you can go and enjoy them. And in the meantime, you will also be supporting some great local businesses, which is also very important because really, the standardized corporate chain cookies here are garbage. As is the coffee. So go get some really good coffee and really good cookies, ours, from one of the many specialty coffee shops we work with here. And of course, hit us up on Instagram or Facebook or whatever if we've inspired you to bake a batch of cookies, either using our basic recipe or just by using our tips, or really Alannah's tips, not mine, because mine are just angry anti-chocolate chunk, not tips. Probably not helpful. And tag us in your pictures and we'll share your triumphant creations. Hell, share them if they're catastrophic as well. We'll try and help troubleshoot them if Alannah hasn't done enough already. And we'll give you encouraging pats on the back and we promise we won't repost them saying, nailed it! Unless you want us to. Alannah's not that mean. I'm maybe that mean. I'll be nice. We'll both be nice. Show us what you got. You can, of course, find, tag, repost, or make fun of us at Norton of Paris on Instagram. I'm at Tavalai, Tavallai, which is my family name.
And I'm at Hannala, Hannala, which is my first name backwards.
And we'll see you next time in the Transplant Kitchen on Paris Underground Radio. For more exciting shows, visit parisundergroundradio.com or follow the Paris Underground Radio channel on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you tune into podcasts. And don't forget, please, 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 rate and review us. Give us 5 stars and a glowing review on Apple Podcasts, even if that's not normally your platform, because that really helps with visibility of the podcast, get it seen so other people can find it, blah, blah, blah. I hear this at the end of every podcast I listen to, so I'm assuming this must be truth. Maybe it's urban folklore. Yeah, no. Does it work? Do you know anything about this?
I have no idea.
No. Anyway, please do it because it also boosts our egos. We like seeing that we have 5-star reviews. We like getting reviews, unless they're bad.
Stop asking.
All right, well, as we say, merci et on se voit la prochaine fois dans the Transplant Kitchen sur Paris Underground Radio. Anyway, see you next time in the Transplant Kitchen.
Bye.